Most people walk into a week with nothing but a vague idea of what they need to do. They're juggling a do list in their heads, reacting to problems as they come up, and hoping things just somehow work out. But here's the truth, hope is not a strategy if you want success. Real success, you can't leave your week to chance. You need clarity, because clarity is power. And the only way to create clarity is to plan your week before it begins. When you sit down, even for just 20 or 30 minutes, to look at the week ahead, something shifts. You move out of a reactive state and into a proactive one. Suddenly, you're not at the mercy of distractions or surprises. You're not spending your time putting out fires. You're creating the fire. You're deciding what matters most. You're choosing where your energy goes rather than letting the world choose for you. Clarity gives you control. Think about it all. When you wake up in the morning and already know what your priorities are, there's no time wasted trying to decide what to do. You're not scrolling through your phone, checking your inbox, waiting for direction. You've already made the decision. That's powerful. That gives you momentum. That saves you energy, and more importantly, it helps keep your mind free for what really matters: execution. Planning your week isn't about being rigid. It's about creating structure that sets you free. Because when you're clear on what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, and why it matters, you can move with confidence. You're not second guessing every move. You're not wondering where you're doing the right thing. You already know, and clarity gives you certainty. And when you operate from a place of certainty, you start showing up differently. You make stronger decisions. You follow through. You build trust with yourself. Now, clarity isn't just about having a list of tasks. Anyone can scribble down a bunch of things they need to do. That's not planning. That's dumping. Real planning means you zoom out and ask the deeper questions. What outcomes do I want to create this week? What are the top 3 things that would move the needle for me? What's the one thing I could do this week that, if I got it done, would make the biggest difference in my life, in my business, in my health, in my relationship? When you ask those questions, you start to separate the noise from the needle movers. And when you plan your week around those needle movers, you stop being busy and you start being effective. Because let's be honest, anyone can fill up their week: meetings, emails, errands, but none of that guarantees progress. What guarantees progress is clarity of purpose and focused execution. That starts with planning. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you plan your week. You create a mental map. Your brain starts to connect the dots. You begin to visualize your path before you even take the first step. That's powerful because the mind craves direction. And when it has it, it performs better. You think faster, you react smarter, you recover quicker when setbacks come because you know where you're headed. That kind of internal certainty, that's what makes people unstoppable. Look, you've probably had those weeks where you felt like you were grinding nonstop, but at the end of it, you look back and ask yourself, what did I actually accomplish? That happens when there's no clarity. That happens when there's no intentional planning. And you can't afford to live like that if you're serious about success. On the flip side, think about a time when you were locked in, focused, executing with precision. A time when things just clicked. That wasn't magic. That was clarity. That was the result of knowing what you wanted, why it mattered, and what needed to be done to get there. You don't need to wait for those kind of weeks to happen by accident. You can create them on purpose. Every single week. It starts with making the decision that your week will not own you. You will own your week. It starts with creating space, even if it's just on a Sunday night or Monday morning, to ask yourself what matters most this week. Where do I need to focus? What will success look like 7 days from now? Because once you have that clarity, everything else gets easier. Not because the world changes, but because you change. But become the kind of person who doesn't drift. You direct. You don't re-add. You don't just survive the week. You own it. That's the power of planning your week. Let me ask you a simple question. What's the one thing you can never get back? No matter how hard you work, no matter how much money you make, no matter how smart you are, it's time. You can lose money and make it back. You can lose energy and rest to recover it. But once a moment passes, it's gone forever. That's why if you're not planning your week, if you're not being intentional with how you use your time, you're robbing yourself of your most precious resource. And you're doing it quietly, one distracted day at a time. We live in a world where distractions are not just common. They're engineered. Your phone, your inbox, your social media feed, they're all designed to steal your focus and hijack your attention. And if you don't have a plan for your time, guess what? Someone else does. If you don't fill your calendar with what matters to a you, it's going to get filled with what matters to everyone else. You want success, then you've got to treat your time like gold. Actually, more than gold. You've got to treat it like oxygen, non-negotiable, vital, sacred. You've got to defend it. And the first line of defense is a weekly plan. When you plan your week, you're not just making a list, you're allocating your life. You're saying, this is what matters to me. This is where I will invest my energy. This is how I will move forward. It's not about being busy. Busy people are everywhere. It's about being effective, and the most effective people don't fill their days with endless tasks. They fill their days with purpose. You can't afford to let your time be stolen by low priority tasks, interruptions, or things that don't move the needle. When you don't plan, you leave space for chaos. You leave space for the urgent to overtake the important. But when you sit down to plan your week, you create a map for your energy. You're telling yourself, this is where I will spend my attention. This is where I will say yes. And just as importantly, this is where I will say no. Because if you don't have boundaries around your time, you will burn out, period. You'll end up exhausted, drained, and wondering why you're working so hard but getting nowhere. Planning your week allows you to zoom out, to breathe, to see the bigger picture. It helps you ask, am I spending my time on things that align with who I want to become? Am I doing what matters most? Or am I just reacting to whatever shows up? And here's something most people forget. Time isn't just about productivity. It's about meaning. It's about creating space for the things that truly matter. Your family, your health, your growth, your joy. When you plan your week, you're not just making room for work, you're making room for EO life. Because if you're not careful, life will pass you by while you're stuck in the grind, always busy, never fulfilled. Planning your week puts you in the driver's seat. It helps you be intentional about the trade-offs you're making, because every yes is a no to something else. And if you don't know what your priorities are, you'll say yes to the wrong things. You'll say yes that feel urgent but leave you empty. You'll say yes to people who drain you, to habits that slow you down, to patterns that keep you stuck. That's why I tell people, your calendar is a mirror. It doesn't lie. If I looked at your week, would I see your values? Would I see your goals? Would I see your dreams in there? Or would I see scattered energy, constant distractions, and no time for what really matters? When you take control of your time, everything changes. Your relationships get stronger. Your focus gets sharper. Your energy becomes more sustainable. Why? Because you're living on purpose. You're not just getting through the week. You're owning it. You're choosing how to show up. You're leading your life, not just reacting to it. And let me tell you, success doesn't happen by accident. It's built one decision at a time, one day at a time. 1 week at a time. So if you want to succeed, don't start with some massive life overhaul. Start by planning your week. Start by valuing your time enough to decide what matters most. Because spend your week is how you spend your life. That's why time, once lost, is the costliest thing you'll never get back. Have you ever had one of those mornings where you wake up and before your feet even hit the floor, your mind is racing? You're already thinking about the meetings, the deadlines, the errands, the text you forgot to respond to. It's like the day hasn't even started, but you already feel behind. That constant state of mental pressure, that anxiety, that tightness in your chest. That's what happens when you don't plan your week. You leave everything up to chance and your mind pays the price. When you don't have a plan, your brain becomes a battlefield. You're trying to make decisions on the fly, juggle a dozen priorities, and remember everything at once. That creates stress. That creates overwhelm. And over time, it wears you down. It drains your energy, steals your joy, and limits your ability to perform at your highest level. But when you dull plan your week, when you take just a little time to map things out, you shift that completely. You go from chaos to clarity, from reaction to intention, from stress to strength. You see, stress isn't just about how much you have to do. It's about how uncertain and out of control you feel about what you have to do. The unknown is what eats away at you. The constant guessing, the switching from task to task, the mental clutter, it piles up. It creates this background noise in your mind that never really goes away. And that noise, that's what kills your focus. That's what burns out high performers. Out the work, the lack of clarity. Planning your week gives your brain a break. It gives you mental space. You stop trying to hold everything in your head because you've already put it on paper or on your calendar or into a system. You've already made the tough decisions ahead of time. And once that's done, you can stop overthinking. You can stop second guessing. You just execute it. You follow the plan you've created. That's where peace of mind comes from. Not from having less to do, but from knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. I've seen so many people who are overwhelmed not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because they're trying to carry their entire life in their head. Every appointment, every deadline, every personal obligation. And they wonder why they can't sleep. They wonder why they're snapping at people. They wonder why they feel so scattered and exhausted all the time. It's not a mystery. It's a lack of structure. And the cure isn't some fancy technique. It's planning. It's giving your brain the gift of order. Now, this isn't about becoming some robot who follows a schedule down to the second. Life going to throw curveballs. That's guaranteed. But when you've planned your week, you have a framework. You have a baseline. And that baseline gives you the flexibility to adjust without falling apart. You're grounded. You know where to come back to. That's what makes you resilient under pressure. Not perfection, but preparation. Think about elite athletes. Before they even step into the arena, they've walked through every move in their head. They've trained, they've visualized, they've planned. That preparation gives them calm in the chaos. It lets them adapt in the moment without losing sight of the goal. Your week is no different. When you prepare, when you plan, you perform at a higher level because you're not just surviving the demands of the day, you're navigating them with confidence. And here's the part most people don't think about. When you reduce stress through planning, your creativity goes up. Your presence goes up. You start to enjoy your days more. You're not just rushing from one task with a clenched jaw and a ticking clock. You're present. You're engaged. You actually feel your progress. That's a completely different quality of life. And you don't need to wait years to feel it. You can feel it next week just by taking control of how you show up. You're going to be busy either way. Life doesn't slow down, but you get to choose how you experience it. You can be busy and stressed, or busy and centered. You can be busy and burned out, or busy and strategic. The difference is in your preparation. The difference is in your plan. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, scatter. Or like your week is running you instead of the other way around, don't try to work harder. Don't try to hustle your way through the fog. Sit down, breathe, map out your week, decide what matters, create space, and watch how quickly your stress fades and your strength returns. That's how you turn pressure into power. Let me tell you something that most people never really understand. Success didn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. It's not about how fired up you are on a Monday morning. It's about what you're still doing on Friday afternoon when nobody's watching. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable. And if you want to be consistent, if you build habits that actually stick, you need accountability. You need structure. That's where weekly planning comes in. When you plan your week, you're not just writing down tasks. You're making a commitment. You're saying, this is what I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to do it. That creates a level of personal accountability that changes the game. It's no longer just an idea floating around in your head. It becomes a decision, a promise. And when you make those decisions in advance, it's easier to follow through, even when you don't feel like it. Because let's be real, there are going to be days when you're tired, days when you're distracted. Motivation just doesn't show up. But if you've already made the plan, if you've already decided, you don't need to negotiate with yourself. You just act. Planning removes the emotional debate. It takes the energy draining back and forth out of your mind. That constant inner dialogue. Should I do this now? Should I wait? Maybe I'll do it later. That's what kills momentum. But when your calendar already has your most important task locked in, there's no room for that debate. It's on the schedule. It's time to execute. That's how you build consistency. That's how you stay on track when your mood shifts, when your energy dips, when life throws distractions your way. And you know what else happened? You start to build trust with yourself. That's huge, because the fastest way to destroy your confidence is to break promises to yourself. Every time you say you're going to do something and you don't, you chip away at your own belief. You create this invisible pattern in your nervous system that says, I don't follow through. But when you plan your week and then follow that plan, even if it's not perfect, you reinforce a different belief. I keep my word. I'm reliable. I get things done. That's how self-respect is built. That's how leaders are built. And this isn't just about work or business. This is about your health, your relationships, your personal growth. If you don't plan time for the gym, it probably won't happen. If you don't schedule time to connect with the people you love, life will fill up that space with something else. If you don't make room for your own learning, your own development, you'll always be stuck reacting to your circumstances instead of growing beyond them. Weekly planning creates that space. It forces you to be intentional about what matters. Not just what's urgent, but what's important. I see it all the time. People say they want success. They want freedom. They want to feel fulfilled. But their actions don't match their words. Not because they're not capable, because they're not organized. They don't have a system to stay consistent. And without consistency, you might start strong, but you'll fall off. You'll drift. You'll caught in cycles where you're always restarting, always trying to regain momentum, always playing catch up. That's why you've got to build the habit of planning your week. It creates rhythm. It creates stability. It becomes your anchor in a world that's constantly pulling your attention in every direction. And once that habit is in place, you start to stack wins. You build momentum. You string together days, then weeks, then months of progress. That's when things start to change in a real way. That's when your life starts to reflect your potential. Look, motivation is great, but it's fleeting. Discipline is better, but it takes time to develop. Planning your week is the bridge. It's the tool that allows you to take your ambition and turn it into action. It gives you a structure to show up no matter what. And when you show up consistently, you become unstoppable. Not because you're perfect, but because you refuse to quit. So if you want to feel in control, if you build habits that actually stick, if you want to become the kind of person who follows through and delivers, start by planning your week. That's where consistency is born. One of the most powerful things you can do for your life is to develop the ability to look forward, to see beyond the noise of the present moment and anticipate where you're going. Not just react to what's in front of you, but actually lead your life. And weekly planning is where that leadership starts. Because let's face it, most people are stuck in a constant state of reaction. They wake up, they check their phone, and boom, they're pulled into everyone else's agendas. Emails, notifications, distractions. Before they've even had a chance to think, the day's already halfway gone. That's not living. That's surviving. That's drifting the week, hoping things somehow work out, when deep down you know you're capable of more. You're not here to drift, you're here to drive. And the way you start driving is by building the habit of anticipating, of looking ahead and asking the right questions. What's coming this week? What are the challenges? Where do I need to be proactive instead of reactive? That's what weekly planning does. It puts you in a proactive mindset. It forces you to step back and see the bigger picture before you get lost in the small details. It helps you get clear on your priorities, your responsibilities, and your outcomes. And when you do that consistently, you're no longer surprised by life. You're ready for it. You've got to understand, most stress doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from not being ready for what happens. It comes from being blindsided, from having to make decisions under pressure, from dealing with last-minute chaos that could have been prevented. But when you plan your week, you start thinking like a leader. You start asking yourself, what's the outcome I want from this meeting? What prep do I need for that conversation? What potential roadblocks could throw me off? You anticipate, you prepare, you get ahead of the curve. And here's what's beautiful. When you start living this way, life starts to slow down. Not because there's less to do, but because you're moving with clarity. You're not racing from one fire to the next. You're not constantly reacting to problems that could have been avoided. You're making thoughtful decisions. You're directing your time and energy instead of scattering it in 100 directions. That's how you create flow. That's how you find your rhythm. Think about it. When a pilot flies a plane, they don't just take off and hope they figure it out midair. They file a flight plan. They anticipate weather, wind, turbulence. They plan for contingencies. Why? Because that's what keeps the flight smooth. That's what prevents disaster. Your week is no different. If you don't file a flight plan, you're going to get knocked around by every little disturbance that shows up. But if you do, you fly with stability. You navigate with confidence. This habit of anticipating also makes you sharper. It activates a higher level of awareness. You start noticing patterns. You start recognizing what works and what doesn't. And instead of repeating the same problems week after week, you learn. You improve. Evolve. That's the growth mindset in action. Not just reading about it, not just talking about it, but living it. Using your week as a practice ground to become better, more effective, more intentional. And let's talk about confidence. Real confidence doesn't come from hype. It doesn't come from pretending to have it all together. It comes from preparation. It comes from knowing you've taken the time to think ahead, to plan, to anticipate. That preparation gives you certainty in uncertain situations. You walk into meetings more confident. You make decisions more decisively. You show up with presence because your mind isn't racing. You've already done the thinking. You've already built the map. And when unexpected things do happen, and they will, you're better equipped to adapt. Why? Because your week has structure. You've made space for what matters. You've built margin into your time. You're not running on fumes. You're leading your life, not chasing it. That's the mindset of someone who wins, not just once, but over and over again. Someone who doesn't leave things to chance. Someone who doesn't hope things go well, but plans to make them go well. Someone who anticipates, prepares, and executes. Because success doesn't belong to the lucky. It belongs to the ready. So if you want to play at a higher level, if you want to lead your life instead of constantly reacting to it, start anticipating. And the simplest, most powerful way to do that is by planning your week.